You thought love had an expiration date, didn't you? That once the years passed and the mirrors told quieter stories, desire would fade into memory. But what if I told you it doesn't? What if I told you that one gaze, one soft conversation, one slow, burning night could awaken everything you thought was gone forever? This isn't about fantasy. It's about truth, about touch that doesn't just reach the skin but breaks open the soul. Here, love isn't rushed, passion isn't loud, it's slow, it's sacred. It's the way he undresses you with his eyes first, not his hands. The way your body remembers what it means to be wanted, worshipped, and finally seen. If you've ever thought your time was over, this space is for you. Because love, real deep soul-stirring love, doesn't care about age. It only cares that your heart is still beating. And if it is, your story isn't over. Years of silence and routine made the body forget what desire felt like, until one unexpected gaze stirred something buried for decades, something aching to be remembered. It had been years since I'd thought of myself as anything more than necessary. Necessary for errands, for cooking, for showing up. I moved through life quietly, politely, without taking up too much space. My skin was tired, not from age, but from being untouched. My voice softened over time, not from grace, but from not being asked how I truly felt. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting anything more than a warm cup of tea at night and the comfort of old routines. Love became something I read about. Desire became something that belonged to other people. Until that evening, I was sitting on a bench outside the gallery, a soft wind brushing past me as I waited for my ride. I hadn't gone out for anything like that in years, but a friend insisted I join. I didn't want to. I almost canceled, but I showed up. That decision, that small choice to say yes to something, changed everything. He walked past me at first, phone in hand, smile lazy, unaware, and then he looked up. And he looked again, not in the way young men look through you, not in the way strangers look out of obligation. He looked like he was seeing something he recognized, something he wanted to remember. And I froze. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that. I told myself to turn away. I told myself to laugh it off. He was too young, too free, too everything. But I didn't move, and neither did he. For a second, the noise around us fell away, and I felt this stillness inside me. I hadn't felt still in a long time. I was always tense, always bracing. But in that moment, I just breathed, because someone had looked at me like I was still something worth looking at. He walked toward me, asked if I was okay, said I looked beautiful in the light. I laughed awkward, caught between modesty and disbelief. He smiled deeper, as if he already knew the laugh came from a place that hadn't been touched in years. He asked if he could sit with me. I nodded before I could think. The conversation was gentle. He didn't push. He didn't flatter in the empty ways men sometimes do. He was just curious. He asked about the painting I liked inside, and I told him. I told him why it made me feel something. I hadn't shared something like that in a long time, and he listened like every word mattered. When my ride came, I thought that was it. I almost didn't give him my number. I thought, this isn't real. This is just a sweet moment. But something inside me said, don't run this time. The next day he texted, and the day after that. Slowly we began to see each other. At first it was light, safe. Coffee shops, bookstores, walks in parks. But every time he looked at me, something in me started to remember. I remembered the feeling of wanting to be close to someone, the ache of anticipation, the warmth of laughter that lingered after goodbye. I remembered the soft edge of nervousness before a kiss, and then I remembered the kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't wild. It was steady. His hand on my jaw, his breath close, and that look in his eyes, like he wanted to memorize the shape of me, like he wanted to kiss not just my lips, but every moment I'd ever gone without one. When he kissed me, I didn't feel young again. I didn't want to. I just felt alive. That night, I let him see me, not just my body, but the years, the lines, the quiet parts of me, and he didn't shy away. He ran his hands down my back like he was touching something sacred. And when his mouth moved across my skin, he didn't hurry. He made time slow down. Every inch of me felt noticed. I cried afterward, not because I was sad, but because I couldn't remember the last time I felt that known. He didn't ask why, he just held me. His hands didn't wander, they rested. Over the weeks, something grew between us that wasn't built on lust. It wasn't just the way he touched me. It was the way he saw me when I spoke, the way he noticed the way I curled my hands when I was nervous, the way he watched my mouth when I laughed. He remembered the smallest things. That I liked my tea with honey and not sugar, that my favorite song made me cry, that I hadn't danced in years because I didn't think anyone would want to hold me. So he danced with me in the living room. No music, just us. And when he said he loved me, it wasn't during a grand moment. It was quiet. I was washing a dish. He walked up behind me, kissed the back of my neck, and whispered it like a promise. Something opened in me that night, something soft and fierce. I gave myself to him completely, not just my body, but my story, my fears, the parts of me that still flinched when love got too close. And he stayed. I don't know what the world thinks when it sees us together. I know people talk. I know they wonder, but I've stopped caring, because when he looks at me, really looks, I remember that desire doesn't belong to the young. That passion doesn't expire. That love can come late, but still arrive right on time. He made me feel like I was not a chapter closing, but a story just beginning, and that, for the first time in decades, made me feel like I was home. That's all I needed. He was gentle but unapologetic, not afraid to touch what had long been untouched. Every glance from him asked a question the heart hadn't dared answer in years. I didn't see him coming, not in the way that mattered. I was so used to being passed by, brushed aside in rooms full of younger, louder voices, that I didn't even expect to be noticed. Most days, I didn't want to be. It felt safer that way, untouched, unseen, unbothered. I had lived through years of being needed, but not desired, tolerated, but never truly held. I made peace with it. I told myself love had been a season that had passed, but the way he looked at me made something shift. At first, I thought I imagined it, that steady, searching gaze, that way his eyes didn't flinch, didn't flick away. It wasn't polite interest or flattery. It was deeper, like he saw something in me I had stopped showing the world. And he didn't blink. I tried to carry on the way I always had. I smiled lightly. I said the right things. I kept my arms folded, my tone careful, my body still. But he wasn't afraid of silence. He stood close, not imposing, just steady, like he could wait all night for me to exhale. And I did. He reached for my hand once while I was pouring tea. No words, no request, just the warmth of his fingers lightly brushing mine, as if he was asking without asking, "Can I hold this? Can I hold you?" I didn't pull away. It had been so long since I'd been touched without obligation, touched not to take something from me, but to offer something. His touch wasn't loud, it wasn't hurried, it was quiet but clear. And it made my skin come alive again, like it remembered something I'd almost forgotten. We sat on the floor that evening, close but not pressed. His knee touched mine. It felt innocent at first, until he leaned in and looked at me again with that same unflinching gaze. The kind that makes you forget how to lie to yourself. I felt bare, even though I hadn't taken off a thing, and yet I didn't want to run. He touched my cheek so softly it nearly broke me, not to grope, not to claim, just to feel, like he was tracing a history he wanted to understand. I closed my eyes and let myself be touched, really touched, the kind that says, "I see you, and I still want you." When he kissed me, it wasn't perfect. It was hesitant at first, the way real things are, but then it deepened, slow, warm, and certain, like he'd been waiting, but now that the door had opened, he wasn't going to rush through. He was going to walk step by step with reverence. And I let him. I didn't try to hide the marks of time on my body, the softness that hadn't been there years ago, the lines that traced my story. He kissed them like they were maps he had longed to follow. He didn't ask me to be anything other than what I was. There was a moment, his hand just below my collarbone, his mouth against my shoulder, when I felt completely undone, not from what he was doing, but from what he wasn't doing. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't trying to fix me. He was just there, fully, looking at me like I was something to be discovered, not corrected. We didn't speak much that night. Words felt too clumsy. It was all breath, skin, stillness and heat, and something else, something unspoken, a kind of permission. He gave me permission to want again, to ache, to feel the deep, slow pulse of longing in a body I thought had gone quiet. He touched my back, my hips, my thighs, not with urgency, but with curiosity. Like each part of me told a story he wanted to hear again and again. And when it was over, when we lay there tangled and warm, he didn't roll away. He didn't look at his phone or shift into distance. He stayed, his fingers tracing my arm, his breath slow against my neck. No expectations, no next move, just presence. It made me cry quietly, not because I was sad, but because I hadn't felt that safe in years. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of ache, not one of regret or shame, but one of awakening. My skin felt awake. My heart didn't feel empty. I stood in front of the mirror and didn't flinch. I saw a woman who had been touched with care, not because she begged for it, but because she still deserved it. He didn't change my life in a dramatic way. He didn't promise me forever or paint illusions. He just showed up, saw me, touched me like I still mattered, and didn't apologize for any of it. That was enough. That was everything. It wasn't just the warmth of his hands. It was the way he listened, the way he undressed her without touching her, until the soul stood naked first. I never thought I'd find myself telling a story like this at this stage in life. I'd spent years carefully putting myself back together after heartbreaks that left more silence than memory. I built a quiet life, one with soft corners, safety, and solitude. I didn't expect to be desired, and I certainly didn't think I'd ever want to be again. But then he sat across from me, in a small cafe on a gray afternoon, and asked me something so simple, so gently disarming, that I forgot how to hold my walls in place. He asked, "What made you stop painting?" He didn't know I used to paint. I hadn't said it aloud in years, but he had seen a photo in my hallway, one I had taken myself down and tucked behind books years ago, and somehow he noticed, and that was just it. He noticed. And when he asked, he didn't look away. He didn't ask the way people ask to make conversation. He asked like he wanted the answer, not the polite version, the real one. I found myself telling him things I hadn't said out loud in over a decade. About how I used to paint late into the night, barefoot on the wooden floor, wine forgotten on the windowsill. About how I stopped because someone once told me I wasn't talented enough to make anything that mattered. About how I believed them. About how over time I let the quiet spread until even I couldn't remember what color felt like anymore. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just looked at me like every word I said was something sacred. Like I was unwrapping a part of myself I'd buried so deep. Even I was surprised it still had breath. There was something in his silence that didn't feel empty. It felt like a hand held open, waiting for mine. Later, when we walked, he didn't reach for me right away. He let the space between us speak. Every glance from him was slow, deliberate, searching. I could feel him seeing parts of me I hadn't shown anyone in years. It felt like he was taking his time, unbuttoning not my blouse, but the years of doubt, slipping his fingers through layers of loss until all that was left was something raw, trembling and aching to be seen. It wasn't sexual at first. It wasn't about the body. It was emotional undressing, the kind that makes you dizzy, the kind that makes you want to hide and reach for someone at the same time. He came to my place a week later, bringing a canvas and a box of paint. I stared at him like he was mad. He just smiled and said, "You don't have to prove anything. Just let your hands remember. That night I painted. For the first time in years, I let my fingers move without judgment." He sat behind me, not watching with scrutiny, but with awe. His presence made the room feel safe. I cried quietly as I painted, not because I was sad, but because something old in me was waking up. When I finally turned to face him, my cheeks still wet, he stood slowly and walked toward me. His hand reached for my face, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, warm. He touched me like I was a page in a book he had waited years to read. His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth. His other hand rested gently on my hip. And we just stood there, no rush, no pretending, just breathing together. He kissed me like he'd waited until the moment was right, not for him, but for me, like he needed my soul to open before his lips ever touched my skin. And when they did, I felt it, not just in my mouth, but in every part of me I had thought was done feeling. That night, when we moved to the bedroom, it wasn't wild. It wasn't the hunger of two strangers. It was the slow, trembling joining of two people who had already touched each other without laying a hand. Every glance had undressed a layer. Every word had undone a button. So when his hands finally moved across my body, it felt like the natural continuation of something far deeper than desire. He kissed the places no one had touched in years, my stomach soft with time, the inside of my wrist delicate and worn. He whispered nothing clever, nothing rehearsed, just my name again and again like it was enough. I didn't hide my body. I didn't hold in my breath or curve away from the light. Because by the time we came together, he had already touched the part of me that mattered most, the part no one else had dared touch in years. He had kissed the soul first, and when it was over, when we were lying still, he didn't fall asleep right away. He reached for my hand and kissed the back of it, the way you do when you say thank you without words. I closed my eyes and thought, so this is what it feels like to be seen, not wanted for usefulness, not needed for care, but desired deeply because I exist, and that was enough. What began with soft conversation turned into slow, burning nights, where love wasn't rushed, where passion took its time, and where nothing about her felt forgotten anymore. It started quietly, the way most real things do. He spoke with a kind of care that felt rare, asking questions and actually waiting for the answers, listening not just to the words, but to the pauses in between them. And I found myself softening in ways I hadn't in years. There was something in his presence that asked for honesty, not performance, not a version of me, but the full weight of who I really was. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was a glance held a second longer than expected. It was the way his eyes flicked to my mouth when I smiled, the way he leaned in, not to possess, but to understand. With him, silence didn't feel like something to fill. It felt like a place to rest. The first night he sat on my couch, he didn't make a move, he just listened. My stories stumbled out, half embarrassed, half relieved to be heard. He didn't rush me. He didn't rescue me from my own vulnerability. He just held space, real space, and somewhere between my confessions and his steady breath, I realized I was beginning to trust him, and slowly, without either of us naming it, something began to shift. The air between us thickened with heat that didn't need to be announced. It moved between us in subtle touches, his knee brushing mine, his hand grazing the small of my back as he passed. It was a slow burn, like the turning of a season you don't notice until everything's changed. One night, I opened the door and his eyes told me everything before his mouth said a word. There was no pretending anymore. The need was there, but so was the patience. He stepped in, and for a long moment we just stood close, breathing the same breath. His hand came to my waist. I felt the hesitation, not because he was unsure of himself, but because he respected the weight of that moment. And then he kissed me. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't hungry. It was deliberate, the kind of kiss that feels like a promise, not a request. He didn't grope. He didn't take. He moved with purpose, but with tenderness, like he wanted me to feel everything, not just on my skin, but deep in the parts of me that had long gone numb. He held the back of my neck and kissed me again, deeper this time. My hands found his shirt, clinging not with desperation, but with gratitude. It had been so long since I'd been kissed like that, not to ignite a fire, but to build one slowly, brick by brick, flame by flame. When we moved to the bedroom, there was no fumbling, no awkward tension, just a quiet understanding. He sat me on the edge of the bed and knelt in front of me, slipping off my shoes like it was sacred. Every button he undid felt like a note in a melody he already knew by heart. My breath caught when he touched my shoulder, then my back, not because I feared it, but because I felt seen, revered. He didn't ask me to be young. He didn't try to shape me into something smoother, firmer, more obedient. He traced the lines of my body with his hands like he was reading a love letter written over time. He pressed kisses into the curve of my stomach, the hollow of my throat, the inside of my wrist, soft places no one had bothered to linger on in years. We took our time. We made no attempt to rush past the build. He worshipped me with a slowness that made my body ache, not from absence, but from remembering. He brought the parts of me that had been sleeping back to life. When he entered me, it wasn't the climax of something lustful. It was the deep joining of two people who had already met in the most vulnerable places. He held my hips not to control, but to anchor. Our bodies spoke a language older than words. Every movement was a conversation. Every breath a prayer. The way he whispered my name made me tremble, not because of the sound itself, but because of the way he said it, like I was something sacred, something he didn't want to conquer, but cherish. Afterwards, we didn't separate. We stayed close, his arm draped around my waist, his hand resting on my stomach. We didn't talk. There was no need. Everything that needed to be said had been spoken through fingers and lips, through gasps and stillness. He stayed the night, and in the early morning light, when I turned toward him, he was already awake, watching me like I was the first thing he had ever truly wanted. No one had looked at me like that in years. Maybe ever. I made coffee in a robe that barely stayed tied. He leaned in the doorway, shirtless, barefoot, smiling like he belonged there. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe he did. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't define anything. We just lived the moment. Night after night, conversation turned to closeness, and closeness turned to heat, and heat turned to love. Not the kind built on fantasy, but the kind that grows from truth. From time, from choosing each other, slowly and fully. With him, I wasn't someone to fix. I was someone to feel, to learn, to love. I wasn't a second chance. I was the first real one, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt home. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of what you still long for or quietly hope could happen, don't leave in silence. Tap like, share this feeling, and hit subscribe to join me for more stories that prove deep love doesn't fade with time. It just waits to be remembered.